Hi everyone, so today I'm going to be talking about one practice you can use when you're working with students who have dyscalculia. Dyscalculia is a mathematics learning disability that causes severe difficulty when making calculations. These students can have trouble with numbers, understanding math facts, basically just math in general. With dyscalculia, though, students typically have normal auditory and vocabulary abilities, so it's just a mathematics learning disability. It's not like a cross-curricular widespread learning disability. It's kind of like, I guess you could compare it to, it's like the dyslexia of math. So the practice that we're going to be talking about today is mnemonic instruction. And when working with students with dyscalculia, the use of mnemonics is beneficial in helping them learn. It particularly aids with memorization, which is a fundamental part of mathematical fluency and an area where students with dyscalculia often struggle. I know you've heard of mnemonics before, and you've probably used them at some point in math, whether you realize it or not. A popular example that we all learned in probably middle to high school is PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. We use this with order of operations, and I know we've all heard of it. So when used in mathematics instruction, a mnemonic is a device or a procedure that helps to improve memory. The goal of mnemonics is to help facilitate retrieval of information by tying the learner's previous knowledge to what they're currently learning. It just helps bridge the gap between the two. There are multiple types of mnemonics and different varieties of mnemonic instruction that you can use, and whichever one you pick needs to be based off that student and how they best learn. So it really helps to get to know your students first before you try and implement this into your classroom. There's no like one size fits all for mnemonics. Common types of mnemonics are acronyms, which is like the PEMDAS, peg word, keyword, and even using music in your classroom. And I'm going to go ahead and show you some examples of different mnemonics. So this is an example of the peg word mnemonic system. Basically, it's where you associate numbers 1 through 10 with words that rhyme with each number. So we have like 1 is bun, 2 is shoe, 6 is stick, 7 is heaven. You then associate these rhyming words in a memorable way that will help you remember them in sequential order. A lot of times there's visuals that go with this, and this would be great for students with dyscalculia who are struggling with the basic number facts and can't seem to remember which number comes after which. The next example I have is SOHCAHTOA, which I'm sure we all remember from pre-cal, calculus, Algebra 2 maybe. Basically, it's a mnemonic device helpful for remembering which ratio goes with which when you're doing trigonometry. While this is obviously too advanced for elementary schoolers, you can see how this sort of device helps you remember what you're supposed to be doing, and you can grade adjust this down to where it's age appropriate for students in your classroom. The third example I have is just a cute visual that might help students when they're working to decide which number is greater and which way the sign should go. So basically, it's just outlining the duck's bill and showing how the arrow shape of the duck's bill can be used as your greater than or less than sign. Little cute things like this, while they don't seem like they're much, they really do a lot of work in helping students remember simple math facts. So while doing my research for mnemonic instruction, I read a lot of different articles that talked about different studies and talked about the effectiveness of mnemonic instruction in those studies. One of them I read that stood out to me was where students were given an assessment before mnemonic instruction and after mnemonic instruction. It looked at their scores for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, so it was across all 4 of the major math operations. And in each category, the mean score post-mnemonic instruction had increased by at least 5 points. So students scored at least 5 points higher after mnemonic instruction in each category than they did before mnemonic instruction. In a similar study, students were asked to complete division word problems both before and after mnemonic instruction, In this study, there were only 3 students, but it was 3 very positive outcomes. Students 1 and 2 both had only scored a 4% before mnemonic instruction, and afterwards, after just 1 round of mnemonic instruction with their teacher, they scored a 96% and an 83% respectively. The third student had scored just an 8% before mnemonics and a 100% after mnemonic instruction. By 2 rounds of mnemonic instruction with their teacher, all 3 students had scored 100%. I feel like you're kind of seeing a trend here. So without belaboring the point too much, I just want to address the results of one more study. The third study I examined found that students who had mnemonic instruction learned 75% of the information they were presented, while the control students learned just 43.8% of the information studied. One of the beautiful things about mnemonic instruction is how diverse it is and how applicable it is to the classroom. It can be used in all 3 stages of RTI, Tier 1, 2, and 3. So in Tier 1, it might look something similar to like the PEMDAS acronym, where the teacher provides you with this sort of device to use to help you remember what you're supposed to be doing. And in Tier 2 of RTI, the selection of which mnemonic to use becomes more targeted to the small group that you're working with. Here you can pick specific types of mnemonics for what the students are struggling with, rather than providing them with general procedural mnemonics like the PEMDAS. So if your students are really into music, maybe you could use music. If they're really into a sport, you could make connections to that sport. In Tier 3 of RTI, a common use of mnemonics is creating stories, because you can make it much more like individualized to that student that you're working with. So here, an example of what you might do would be, you could have a student think of math as a story with characters. So if your student really likes football, then you could do a subtraction problem where both numbers are 2 football teams, where one team has more players than the other. And then you could ask them to find out how many more players Team 1 has rather than Team 2. And like when you put it in a context that the student understands like this, it then becomes more relevant to them, and they're more likely to remember the process of finding out how many more players this football team has rather than this football team, when really they're just doing subtraction, but to them, they're playing football. So it kind of makes it more of like a fun way for students to do things in a manner that they're more likely to remember. But due to the time and the individual instruction required to concoct an individual story for each different problem, creating stories and using mnemonics in that way works best in Tier 3. So mnemonics are really meant to bridge the gap between comprehension and memorization, not replace comprehension for memorization, which is a risk that always occurs when using mnemonic instruction. There's always that chance that students will just memorize the mnemonic but not understand how to use it to enhance their learning. So to assess whether or not mnemonic instruction is working, it'll be important to monitor your students beforehand and after to see what kind of improvement they're making. Students will also need to display an understanding of the mnemonic itself. So if students are using a certain kind of mnemonic to solve problems, you should be able to ask them how that helps them, and they should be able to explain it to you. There are different types of mnemonics, each with a different intention, so if students don't understand the mnemonic in that mathematical context, it may be wise to think about a different kind of mnemonic to use for them. But once again, it's so diverse and there are so many different kinds that surely there's one that'll help you. I hope you guys have learned a little bit, and while this strategy isn't entirely unfamiliar to us, it's something that we might not think about using in our classroom. So I hope this gives you a little tip on something that you could do with your students who are struggling with dyscalculia, or any other student in your classroom.